Welcome to the New Warehouse Podcast, the podcast for those that are curious about what's possible inside their four walls. Before we get into this episode, let's hear a word from our sponsors that make this all possible. In my operations years, it seemed like we were always trying to find more space or we needed a quick storage solution for a special project. That's why when I discovered Palite and their Palite Picks solution, I was excited. Made from ultra-strong engineered honeycomb structured board, these corrugated shelving units can support up to 1,100 pounds. They're definitely stronger than they look, and they come to you flat packed for easy installation in minutes. I've built them and utilized them myself. They provide customizable configurations with up to 400 pick faces. If you need storage quick or you need to maximize space utilization, you need Palite. Check them out at palitegroup.com. That's PALLITE group.com. Do you feel like automation is unapproachable? Well, Big Joe Autonomous Solutions is changing that with the AP44. The AP44 is a fully autonomous pallet truck built for real work. Floor-to-floor pallet transportation, no infrastructure changes, no complicated IT project. Setup happens right at the onboard touchscreen. If you can use a smartphone, you can use the AP44. Just select a mission and the AP44 gets moving. Easy switch between fully autonomous, semi-autonomous, and manual mode on this pallet jack keeps it versatile. Learn more at BigJoeForklifts.com. That's BigJoeForklifts.com. Thank you to our sponsors, and now let's get to the podcast.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
It's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, and I am on site here at the Traba office in Manhattan, and I'm joined by Akshay Buddiga, who's a co-founder and CTO of Traba, and also Jeff Chen, who's an engineering director here at Traba as well. And we've had Traba on the show before to talk about how they are approaching labor within the warehouse sector, but they've just launched something new, so we're here with them to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to learn about what this next evolution of Traba is and kind of where it came from as well. So actually, for those that aren't necessarily familiar, why don't you kind of just give us a little brief overview of what Traba is, and you're the co-founder. So also tell us a little bit about kind of the founding story. How'd you end up in the warehouse world, and where did Traba kind of come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So Traba, we got started about 5 years ago in 2021, and we really got started from my co-founder Mike's past experiences in the industry. So he'd worked at McMaster-Carr earlier in his career. And one of the biggest problems that he faced there when he was managing one of their distribution centers in LA was really around labor. And so labor and staffing was just a major problem. Whenever they had large order volume spikes, they would need to tap into staffing agencies. So Mike would work with 4 or 5 different staffing agencies locally, and saw all the typical problems, folks in the industry face, where you're looking at week plus turnaround times, you're looking at 50 to 70% maybe at best fill rates, and then the quality of the workers themselves are also completely all over the place. And so, Mike experienced this. He felt there should definitely be something better, technology-driven solution. And so, there was an opportunity there. My background is more on the tech and engineering side, of course. But prior to Traba, I was a senior engineering leader at Fanatics. So at Fanatics, similarly, saw these problems as well, especially around the holiday season, with labor in our fulfillment centers causing, order delays to our customers. And so when Mike and I started discussing, the opportunity, the problem space, it became very clear that there was a huge opportunity for technology to really transform what staffing looks like within industrials.
Yeah, and I think I've felt that pain myself as an operations manager in the past. And when I first found out about Traba, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Like, let's make this better because this is a painful process. So, what did you think? I mean, you're on the technical side, so Mike's like, hey, let's do this thing for warehousing. What was your first thought there?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, there's just a massive opportunity here, right? I think the supply chain is typically overlooked by technologists. It's not something that, folks really think about day to day typically. And so there's just a massive opportunity to drive a better experience through technology. And so especially talking to, the early folks who would become our first customers, talking to workers down in Miami where we launched, it became really clear, this was generally overlooked. It was a problem space that was not being thought of. And there was a huge opportunity, to drive a much better experience than what customers were receiving day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that experience is definitely like, there was huge opportunity there, I would say, like from personal experience, for sure. Lots of frustrations with the traditional temporary worker, temporary agency setup, and, bringing the technology to it to make it easier to be able to do that. I think was incredibly smart to make that move, right? So now tell us a little bit about, because you've been around for what, like 5 years, 6 years now, right? So Traba started tackling kind of this labor challenge that you just described, right? So over those last 5 years, I mean, tell us a little bit about, how has Traba evolved? What have you kind of taken away from those 5 years focusing specifically on labor?
Yeah. So, we got started down in Miami, and it really was from the beginning, how we can combine both technology and operational partnership with our customers to drive that experience. And so we were able to, flip the script, be able to get up to close to 100% fill rates with customers, drive 1-day turnaround times versus a week or more, really focusing on the consistency of workers. So workers are actually sticking around for a long period of time, ensuring that the match was right. So, having the qualifications, the criteria, and the past experiences that was right for the role. And technology really drives all of this. So we had, obviously the products that we built for the business customer, so that they can, check into the portal both on their desktop as well as on the go on their phone, see which workers are actually coming, who's actually clocked in or clocked out, someone has left the geofence. And then on the worker side, for them to be able to easily find jobs on their phone through the mobile app, manage their times, get paid through the app, making it as seamless as possible for them. And then we also obviously have built a ton of operational tooling and automation for our team internally that has streamlined this entire process of recruiting, screening those workers, ensuring that we're actually finding a good fit. And, I think the data component is super important here. If you look at a traditional agency, you might have just resumes, stacked up in an office somewhere, but you're not actually compounding the understanding of which workers are going to be a good fit for a role and using that, to kind of build up the quality of the matches you're able to deliver for customers. And so that was something that we saw really differentiated us. We were able to drive like incredible customer experiences. We expanded from, just being in Miami and then Florida to now working with enterprises across most of the country. And so it's just been, an incredible ride. I think the technology component and obviously the operational partnership has been really essential to delivering that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really interesting to hear like kind of how you've evolved it, right? And also the ability to create that experience, like as you touched on, but also you mentioned kind of the data you've been able to extract and learn from too as well, and to help improve the experience. But now that data also is kind of led to something new, right? Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, we kind of heard, what Traba started as, right? And what Traba has evolved over the years and been focused on from the labor perspective. But now tell us a little bit about what's new and what is Traba kind of evolving to, I guess.
Yeah. It's something that we're really excited about. The way that we've always described our mission internally has been, we want to build a world where the global supply chain operates at peak efficiency, right? And so that obviously goes beyond just labor and staffing. And so we've always had had bigger ambitions for what we can accomplish, the amount of impact that we can have on our customers. And so, over the past 5 years, really been focused on labor and staffing, but always keeping that longer term vision in mind. And what we saw through our partnership with customers has been that, when we start to see these, labor inefficiencies crop up, a lot of times what we found is that it's actually due to upstream inefficiencies or lack of understanding within the business, right? That could be, data silos within the customer. It could be lack of coordination or communication between departments. It could be reactive decision-making versus proactive decision-making. And so we saw that there was actually a huge opportunity on the intelligence and decision-making side within the business. And so that's what really led us to the thesis for our newest product, which we launched this year, which is called Neo.
Right.
And so Neo really is the AI operating system for the industrial supply chain. And so it sits across all the different systems you might be using. It plugs into them, so no rip and replace required. And it's able to draw data from those systems. It's able to, make insights, recommendations for your operations, as well as take automated actions across some of these different systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, certainly exciting. And I think it's very compelling and interesting because of that data that you've been able to kind of collect and have visibility into over the last 5 years as you've been looking at one of kind of the core challenges and core components of warehousing itself, right? Which is that labor in that aspect. So, tell us, what kind of specifically, triggered this, or what was the catalyst to say like, okay, we want to build this AI industrial operation layer, I think is what you said there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting story. And I'll pass it to Jeff here actually, because I think there's an interesting insight just from our own internal operations that I think really sparked this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here, Kevin. So, first of all, I want to jump on a little bit of a soapbox because one of the funniest things that I saw was, warehouses are sexy being the motto.
Sure.
So I came on board about a little over 2 years ago.
Okay.
And before that, I did my own startup for 10 years. We sold a company, was kind of looking for that next adventure. And the motto that I had for myself was I wanted to look for like unsexy businesses. And to me, what that meant was like businesses where the average person spent about 0 seconds of their day thinking about. And, I think if you look at the industrial supply chain, I'll be honest with you, I spent 0 seconds thinking about it before I even heard of Traba.
Yeah.
But now it's like, if you look at the ceiling light, if you look at the pen and paper here, if you look at the glass of water, everything that you see around you has come from a manufacturing to logistics process to get to the consumer. And so functionally what it is like, the way we live our modern human lives is through kind of the industrial supply chain. And yet, once again, it is something that like no one thinks about. So what I was looking for was basically one in which like there was a massive impact and that there was effectively a greenfield opportunity because the smartest people on the planet were not considering, how do we make this thing better from every angle possible. But if you're able to do so, then you're, I think about it as like a rising tide lifting all boats. Like you are improving the human lived experience for like every single person on the planet. And I think ironically that is like, there's nothing more sexy than that, right?
Yeah.
So
you see the vision. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So warehouses are indeed sexy.
Yes. Yeah,
so we'll start off that way.
Yeah.
But I think, similar to that point, like in terms of like what we learned over 5 years, Akshay and Mike, when they started off, like, it was in Miami, it was like everything was just like do it by hand. Like they drove workers to the businesses. They ran shifts themselves for the entire day. You're there on the floor, 12 plus hours a day. And, that was basically how you're able to see all the things in motion, all the things that like make the whole thing tick and everything that also maybe like makes a shift supervisor want to like tear their hair out. So, what we saw over the course of this was like, I think if you look at it from the outside perspective and then you just told somebody like, hey, like, yeah, this company does staffing for the industrial business. And like, okay, how hard could that be? Like, you're getting some forklift drivers, you're getting some picker packers, like you just put out an ad and whoever comes, right? And it's not until you kind of like step inside the floor that you realize, like, let's say during peak, you have these like lines of people who are like can barely even clock in. You've got like 4 or 5 different sites on the warehouse floor that you're supposed to be at, and your supervisors are nowhere to be found. You have people quitting in the middle of the day because like they can't handle a cold room operation. You have people who can't lift 50 pounds, don't have the GMP certification, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So, it's not until you kind of like get into the ground floor and you're like living that experience day after day, like no one's going to, check in with you at the end of the day and say like, hey, these are all the things that went wrong. Like, can you do better next day? It's like, no, you got to be there.
Yeah.
And so that was functionally what we did for 5 years in order to get to the point where we were delivering, like where the typical experience was like, oh, I expect less than half my workers to show up. I expect them to last about like 3 days, whereas like, we're hitting like almost 100% fill rates and whatnot. And what was interesting throughout that journey was that like, while we were solving the problem of staffing and these businesses were basically saying stuff like, hey, like your temporary workers are better than our full-time workers. They were also like, can we talk about like the 8 other problems that I have to deal with on a regular basis?
Yeah.
And some of it was like billing reconciliation. Some of it was like kind of like shipping and, bulk shipping issues. Some of it was like a lack of visibility of worker productivity. Some of it was, like a lack of visibility of floor utilization, or, like going back to the cold room example, like there's all these crazy anecdotes that we hear. And the one that kind of sticks in my head is like, there's a particular situation where like the workers were wearing ski masks when they're in the cold rooms.
Yeah.
And so like, that's fine. Like they need to stay warm, but like then the facial recognition cameras can't work. So like then you have a compliance safety issue because like you actually don't know who's authorized to actually be there. So there's all these separate problems that kind of came from our experience with like staffing over, again, the course of all these 5 years. And that kind of had become sort of like filed away into our system where we're basically like, look, we want to attack all these things. You need to attack all these things to make the supply chain operate at peak efficiency. And it was kind of just a matter of when. Simultaneously, there was something else going on the engineering side that kind of really happened in this year, which is like we were going up enterprise, as these businesses were getting larger and more complex, had global operations. The things that we were doing was also like we needed to become much more sophisticated on behalf of our customers. And the way we were doing that was basically we ended up building our own AI agents to do a lot of things on our behalf, including stuff like
internally.
That's right. Yeah. So for example, like these days, all of our business intelligence, all of our dashboarding, all of our like engineering tech support, like, ticketing systems and whatnot are all done with our own AI agents. And so it's allowing us to do stuff like effectively build BI tools that like respond in a matter of like seconds, where like if you rewound a couple of months back would take like a data team like a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
And so that was a rousing success for the team internally. And it was then kind of finally about connecting the dots, where it was like, all right, so we have this thing that works incredibly well for serving thousands of businesses, hundreds of thousands of workers. And we also have this like massive gamut of problems that we don't need a need find. We already know these are needs. Like what happens if we just direct that towards that and kind of see what happens? And that's effectively how it was born. And so it's been a lot of fun to kind of like dive into that and kind of get to these points where these businesses are basically just, getting to a point where they're like, I see the way that my business operates like very, very differently after having been exposed to this tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love to kind of the eye opening that you had about the industry a little bit, like, and it's true. I mean, the average person is not thinking like, oh, how did this phone show up at the Verizon store? It's just like, okay, it's just there and I'm going to buy it, right? The same thing with like groceries and all that stuff, right? So very interesting to hear like all of these kind of challenges that you saw and a lot of them pretty nuanced too that you talked about. I mean, like, the face covering and the cold room that's pretty nuanced challenge, right? But like, how do we solve these types of things and how do we see these types of things? So, you talked about kind of starting internally here at Traba and building these AI agents, right? To be able to do some of the things that you talked about, like doing reporting, dashboarding, BI, et cetera. So tell us a little bit about, how do you now take the AI agent and how does that come into a warehouse operation, right? Because you guys are, traditional human labor is like kind of where you started, right? And now you're going to add an AI agent or agents to the workforce, right? How does that actually look for a warehouse operation?
Yeah, so I'll pass it actually to kind of talk ground floor about like agents in general, because I think it's important to lay the land.
Yeah. I think I think obviously AI is obviously a huge buzzword right now, and like
Huge. Yeah.
every technology company obviously is slapping AI on the label, and so I think maybe to start out, just to define like what is an agent and like what's different between an agent and like ChatGPT or Claude, where people are also using that day to day, right? And I think the key difference there between the AI chatbot and agent is really around the capabilities that the agent has. So a chatbot, you can obviously open up ChatGPT on your phone, you can ask a question, and you're going to get an answer, and it's obviously super intelligent, right? It's been trained on all of the internet, and it knows a lot of the stuff, but I think the difference between that and like the agent capability is that the agent is actually, built and trained for your purposes, right? And so in this case, we have Neo as an agent that is plugged into all of your systems, right? It understands your organization, your data, your context, right? And it remembers this over time as well, right? So what it's been told by the users at the business, the context of your operation, your standard processes, these are all things that it's going to learn and get better at. Versus you open up ChatGPT today, it maybe isn't remembering the conversation you had 2 weeks ago. And so, that's one key component. Another is really just the proactivity, right? So right now you open up ChatGPT, it's really, reactive, like you're asking a question, then it'll respond. An agent is actually proactive. So you can instruct it. In this case, you can have Neo watching all the things that are happening within your operation. It can draw connections. It can flag things for you. It can take actions autonomously. And so it can say, hey, based on, the information that's currently in your WMS, the set of emails that came in, the shipments that are on hold at a carrier, we actually recommend you should do X. Or I've already sent an email to DHL to understand why these particular orders are delayed, right? And so now it's acting more like an AI teammate versus, you just asking the AI to answer some question. And so that proactivity and the ability to take actions is really, I think, the key differentiation between the agent and, just a regular AI like chatbot. And so Jeff can chat a little bit more in detail about like the implementation in this case and how we actually went about that.
So from the agent perspective though, just so we kind of clarify, like the agent is being proactive, right? And is going out and doing more things. Is it suggesting to the operator, or is it acting autonomously?
Yeah, so it can be both. So it depends on which one you want, right? And so in some cases it could be like, hey, it surfaced some particular insight or detail based on connecting the dots across the data that is in different systems potentially. So it could surface an insight and say, hey, recommendation here is actually we should probably rebalance the floor. Or, we need to rethink the layout of the facility, for example, right? And so these can be things that it surfaces as an insight, makes a recommendation, but it's up to the person to take an action, right? Especially in this case, if it's like, hey, this is something that is higher stakes as a decision, or the certainty or confidence is a little bit lower, or you haven't set it up to run autonomously, it's going to ask for approval, right? And then let's say you do get to a point of high confidence, or it is a workflow that you want to be completely automated, then you can basically say, okay, cool, I'm going to have the agent actually do this, let's say every day or every week, and it's going to run autonomously. Okay. So example of that, with one of our customers on bulk shipping, label printing automation is an example. So previously they had, someone on their team come in every single day and need to print out all the labels for their bulk shipping. And that, might take an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on how many labels need to be printed. And so that was just, kind of administrative work that needed to be done. And so we basically built out Neo's capability to go into their WMS every morning before anyone comes into work, print out all the labels ahead of time, and you're ready to go by the time someone actually comes in. So that's a case where it's like fully automated.
Yeah. And great use case, definitely, because I'm sure the person that was doing that is just doing some clicks, right? And then
exactly.
waiting.
It's just,
Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense there. So now, I guess, Jeff, tell us a little bit like on the kind of implementation side, right? Because obviously, dealing with the human workers, right, which was where you kind of started, right, and still have too as well, right, to clarify. Obviously with them, there's a screening, bring them in, they clock in, you train them a little bit and you send them to do their work. Now with the AI agent, which is, essentially another worker, right, at this point, I mean, what does that implementation or onboarding look like? How does that look for like a warehouse operation?
So to dive into this, and I think this is something that, is another philosophical element that we've been thinking a lot about because, posturing wise, like another common theme, especially when it comes to AI is like, the question is AI is going to take all our jobs. Is it going to take all our jobs?
Yeah.
Maybe there is a industrial version of that, which is like, are robots going to take our jobs?
Right.
And I think, I would hearken that to basically thinking about, once again, like for the people who have like been on the floor versus not been on the floor. Because I think, for example, Kevin, your audience, when they think about robotics, maybe they're not in the same way that like a typical person who's, watched a YouTube video of that robot that like folds laundry and is just like, okay, is this the end of the world? But like, I think the people who have worked in the industry are just like, robots have been part of this system for decades. Yeah. I think like, 12 years ago, Mike being at MasterCar, like he was talking about like, we've had like auto packers and, auto shippers ever since then. And so what we think is basically happening, or what will happen, is the difference between the relationship of like, where the human and the AI robot, whatever, meet. Example of that is, I was at one of our customers, 3PL Peak last year, and they were very excited to show us like on the floor, like, hey, like there's this new, they call it like the Tonka truck zone. And there's no other way to explain it. They're literally like Tonka trucks, and they just like they pick up packages. They kind of like they kind of like route them into another funnel where they're kind of like going along in the shipping process. And they're very smooth. They're very fast. It's very cool to watch it work. And so the workers that used to be doing that kind of a job, yes, it's true, they no longer do that job. But a number of them had to kind of be repurposed for managing the zone because, look, these Tonka trucks aren't perfect. They do get into trouble. They can get stuck. They can kind of like make the wrong decisions, and you kind of need to debug that system. Sure. So these people were kind of taught something differently. And that's kind of what you're seeing is like that change in relationship, and not necessarily being like, all right, like I'm going to snap my fingers and, Thanos these people away. They're just kind of, in a sense, being up-leveled in this new relationship that we have. And what we actually saw, really fascinatingly, was like pretty much the exact same like example play out within the back office. Because, like the story, these stories basically go like, we're in person. We get to this point where I call the aha moment. So it's just like, we like there's a use case that's like actually the bulk shipping use case that we were talking about, like was basically just a, the CEO was basically just like, it wasn't even part of the discussion. He was basically like, oh, by the way, like we have this really annoying thing that we do. I have no idea if you guys can do anything about it, but like, I just want to tell you about it. Yeah. And then our engineer was like, all right, bet. I'll see you in 24 hours. So 24 hours later, he comes back, turns his laptop around, and it's like clicking itself all the way through. And like, cool. He was saying like he saw the whites of his eyes, like, he was like, and then he was like, everybody get in here. So he like brings everybody in. Yeah. And, and then we started like ideating on a million different things. And then, okay, so that's all beautiful and dandy. And, but that means that like, then you're just like, okay, so we have these folks that may be in the Philippines, and what's going to happen to them, right? Like, do we just fire them? Like, what's the deal? It turns out, again, quite the opposite. They got a hold of the software, and like literally within like a manner, like about 24 or 48 hours, like they were doing basically 10x their workload. So they were, maybe like bulk shipping, like maybe managing, 20 labels to 200 labels. And what that did was, it wasn't like that was their only job. They had about 9 other things that they could be doing that was always in their like wish list of things that they wanted to do and optimize and stuff. Yeah. And
more like project kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But like you couldn't do it because you were just manually clicking shipping labels or something. And so they started doing those things. And then they started using Neo to do those things. And our engineers have been kind of jokingly calling like emergent behavior, because they're the ones that are stressing out our system the most. They're the ones that are trying to push the envelope of like, what else can it do? Can it like do this more efficiently? Can we use Google spreadsheets instead of just plain CSVs? Like, how do I, send like 100 messages at once, 1,000 messages at once? How do I track, kind of the life cycle of, my shipping labels, and basically like automatically decide the next communications that I want to reach out to the carrier or whatever. So these people who used to be a much lower level and were just, kind of clicking machines, like they were effectively given the permission to up level, and they've done so extremely successfully. And so I think like that is kind of what our thesis of what will happen across the board is basically like, it's kind of giving people permission to be creative, to problem solve, to have this like brand new arsenal of weapons at their disposal, which again changes the relationship between like how they work, but in a very positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting to hear that, because I mean, that is, a lot of the skepticism sometimes is like, all right, well, what happens to these people? And I think there's some great stories there of like exactly what happened to people when the AI came in. And I think the example of like, you said the people in the Philippines, like instead of having to do these kind of admin things and never getting a chance to really work on these projects, which are probably continuous improvement and, creating more efficiencies and stuff, now they're like able to focus on that, which is a huge unlock for the organization as a whole, I'm sure. So now when we talk about, bringing in Neo right into the warehouse operation, like you mentioned some use cases here for Neo. Is it that you have these kind of pre-built use cases that you're applying to the warehouse operation, or you're going in, assessing like where does Neo make sense, and then building like to that application? How does that work?
Yeah, maybe I can start this one off. Sure. I think so. Once again, another like I guess this whole podcast is talking about hot topics in the industry. So like another hot topic, right, that you hear about maybe is like forward deployed engineering. And there's been a lot of hubbub about it lately. And I think like, ultimately I think we make a little bit too big of a deal out of it, because I think like what forward deployed is always meant for us. We believe in it very strongly. As I mentioned, like kind of like we believe in being in person. We believe in being literally as close to the customer as possible. We believe that like effectively that aha moment especially when you're trying to introduce a brand new paradigm and you're basically saying, look, like if we do this correctly, if we implement this correctly, that like you will not look at your business the same, because like everything fundamental about it has changed. Things that you considered to be rote tasks have completely, like disappeared, or your margins could just double overnight, because like all of these different things are executed differently, and the decisions that you're making or being brought to you are situations that you have never considered. For example, like Neo Insights have told you that like you have these customers that have been fading for a long time, and like it has been slipped right under your nose. Like, what are you going to do about it? And like all of these, the moments in the moment that I just told you about, in terms of like the, kind of like seeing the CEO kind of like with steam out of his hair.
Sure.
Like our conjecture is basically like that can only happen in person. I've never ever seen that happen on a Zoom call. So you have to be there in person, because like when we were doing these deployments, obviously we do the research of saying like, hey, like working with the team and saying like, hey, what matters to you guys? Oh, like, kind of P&L optimization matters. Maybe it's like something related to carrier claims matters. And so you're going to attack those cases. But when you come in and you're collaborating together, that basically, something very magical happens, where like once you kind of see what that's possible, like all of a sudden you're on the same team, and it's not, kind of this back and forth. Not adversarial, but it's like a true partnership where both sides get really, really excited about what you can do. And that's when the true creative problem solving happens. So I think the answer to that is, kind of half and half. So it's just like you come in with use cases, and Akshay can talk about kind of like how the data connects, because like that's like we can't do anything without data. Like we're very little without data. So that's important. But a lot of the creative problem solving does happen together, and I think that's kind of the joy in this equation, because like you learn a little bit from each new customer, and even more than that, like each thing that you build then compounds, because like everything that you build for a 3PL is going to have enormous value for other 3PLs.
Exactly. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that data aspect, because you guys obviously have 5 years of data, right, of your own, right, from all the operations that you've placed labor in and have worked with. Now, are you drawing from that data plus the customer's data, or is it just trained on customer data only? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. Obviously, to your point, like on the staffing side, we obviously do have 5 years of robust data that from all the engagements we've done over 1 million shifts on the platform, and so gotten a ton of information and data from that. But then obviously for each business, there's its own context and its own operational processes, the data that each customer might have. And as we know with AI, really it really is all about the context and understanding. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to make good decisions or provide good recommendations. It's going to be kind of out of the loop. And so for us, kind of early on, obviously, it's very important to get integrated into the systems that the customer is using to understand kind of the shape of the data, what is available, what maybe is not available. Also, what data or processes are actually not documented anywhere. It's just in someone's head, right? And so, but that's context that's important for the AI agent to be able to know. And so, a lot of times that is actually a partnership with the customer to write down and document things that maybe have been floating in people's head for years, but was never written down. And obviously that's useful for them as well. But then it becomes, obviously, something that the AI agent now is exposed to and understands and knows that it can follow a certain process. And so when we come in, kind of in these partnerships, it's really about first plugging in, diagnosing, what data is available. We want to pull from those different systems and see what kind of the data model or the ontology of the customer actually is. That gets fed into the agent. And then we were talking about the different use cases. It really is, up to the customer. We explore with them, what are the most important, the most valuable use cases that they're looking to solve, the biggest opportunities, the biggest pain points. And then we see, these are the particular, opportunities that are available that Neo can really support. And so we'll work with them, we'll plug into those different systems and then start to build towards, that outcome. And if it is, labor or staffing related, obviously the staffing related, data that we have is massively valuable.
Sure.
We can provide with them with insights around productivity or, wage rates or typical lead times and all kinds of things from our experiences. And then, as Jeff said, as Neo grows and we're adding more and more customers to the platform every week, our intelligence for that specific, industry vertical really expands, right? So as we add more and more 3PL logistics customers to the platform, we're going to continue building Neo's capabilities to solve problems within the space. And that is going to be what, makes it so much more powerful than, using something off the shelf.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very interesting to see how they kind of, it continues to evolve all the time, right? Because the more data you're putting into it, the smarter it's getting. I'm sure the more use cases it's seeing. And as you said, for one 3PL, if you build something for one 3PL, it's going to be valuable for the majority of other 3PLs probably as well. So, from that perspective, when you look at Neo and you look at bringing Neo into operations, so you're kind of now serving, I guess, the warehouse industry with both human workers and AI intelligent workers as well, right? So when you're engaging a customer, I'm curious, on the human worker side, are you also identifying where there could be potential to bring in the Neo AI agent versus the human worker? How does that work? Do you say hey, you've hired somebody for this kind of thing multiple times. It seems pretty administrative. Let's take a look at Neo.
Typically what we look to do in that situation is to diagnose kind of what is the root cause and what is the cause of some of the issues or problems that you might be facing in the business. And, some of those are obviously something that is a symptom where it's okay, this is a problem that Neo could actually support, right? We're tracing this back to reactive decision making or data being siloed or, coordination, communications, not running really smoothly within the business. or it could be, administrative tasks are just taking up so much time, and therefore, we're getting bogged down in this work, and therefore we need to add more human labor, right? And so I think depending on like what is the root cause, that can help us, kind of point in the direction of like, hey, Neo would actually be super helpful and useful here. But a lot of times what we can see is that there's actually, they can be complementary, right? We might be providing workers for, let's say, a warehouse associate position where they're out on the floor, they're picking and packing, or it could be like a forklift operator or reach truck operator role. This isn't something Neo is going to go and do.
Yeah, Neo's not trying to forklift yet. No.
Yeah, exactly. And so, not yet, right? And okay. So, that is still something that you definitely need a human to do. And obviously, Jeff kind of mentioned this earlier, robotics and automation is continuing to, have a place within the industry. Sure. And that'll certainly continue. But like the human aspect will also be there to ensure that you're pointing, both robotics and humans in the right direction to be able to handle those exceptions and make the right decisions. And so I think both of those are still essential. And so Neo, though, can be essentially the layer that plugs in across the top and helps direct where the work needs to be done, flags things proactively that need to be handled ahead of time so you can run your operation more smoothly. The way that I think about it is like, Traba is able to now provide both the brawn, the muscles of the staffing, as well as like the brain with Neo that's actually going to help direct things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it makes a lot of sense, definitely. And I could see how they kind of complement each other, especially from some of the use cases you're talking about here. So I'm curious from both of you. This is a question I've been asking on the podcast a couple times with a couple different people. But you all are in the labor business, the workforce business, right? So when you look kind of to the future, the entry level worker in a warehouse, right, at this point is like a basic material handler, right? Somebody's going to move stuff around, maybe label some stuff, right? Very basic type of thing. But as we start to bring in kind of the AI agents, we bring in some of the robotics, the automation, like how do you see that, whether it's personally or Traba's view, like how do you see like the future entry level worker kind of evolving in the warehouse environment?
Yeah. I think this is a really important question. Obviously, very central to how we think about things because a lot of the folks on our platform are, in that entry level position or moving up. First, I would say like with AI, a lot of times what you're seeing day to day is that it's able to start automating more and more tasks. And so, but a task itself is not the entire job, right? It's not a full workflow. And so if we think about it taking on more of the lower leverage work that people might be doing, it's going to take on and automate more and more tasks. But now the human is actually freed up to take on more in terms of actually what the job itself is defined as, right? You can redefine what actually an entire job or a role encompasses. And so the example we talked about, with the folks in the Philippines doing some of that work is like, now they're going to actually take on a lot more than they used to be able to do, right? And so I think that's going to be something that we continue to see more and more of, where people are expected to do more higher leverage work. There is going to be upskilling that's required to get there. And so we've also seen this obviously on our platform. In a more traditional sense, we have folks who started out maybe as a warehouse associate and they upskill into becoming a forklift operator. And, they get that certification and they get trained up. And so I think similarly, we'll see the same with AI. Jeff gave the example of some of the robotics as well, where people, come in and maybe start with, kind of more manual work, but then they start to manage, the automation doing that manual work or be able to understand the administrative work that Neo is able to do and handle the exceptions of that. And so I think it really is just going to continue moving towards like higher leverage, activities.
What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, obviously concur with that. I think there's an interesting intermediate as well, which is, we like as humans are also doing our best to kind of like almost like usher in this world of, let's say, robotics that are going to be able to take on, again, some of that like lower leverage work that so that we kind of gives us room to up level. And so there's a lot of ways that we're doing that right now, actually, like ourselves. So like we, for example, partner with, data companies, robotics companies, where they need a ton of training data to get like potentially a robot to be able to have the flexibility of a material handler on the floor, right? Sure. Like a material handler is not doing this all day long and just kind of like, having several small motions. It's like you're being asked to do many, many different things on the floor.
So you're using labor training data for robotics companies.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. So that's, again, because, we are agnostic to, how you derive the peak efficiency. It just like we are for any type of activity that allows the warehouses to operate more efficiently, period. So there's also some interesting businesses and customers that we have now that are, once again, employing workers to kind of like leverage like better training for even like kind of like back office AI cases. For example, like we have some customers that are like, there's a lot of like document scanning work where it's basically just like you want to scan these documents such that they can be fed into like AI training systems, and then like kind of disposing of the documents afterwards. So like you have like immediate labor that is for that purpose. And if I were to think about it one way, that's kind of a temporary stopgap, right? But the long term is something, again, that I am very bullish about, which is just how quickly, if you think about kind of these like entry level positions and, stuff that you're on the floor and like something in material handling or picking, packing is something that like you and I could certainly kind of pick up quite quickly, even if we had no background. But I think that with the proper skills with agent training and being able to prompt agents and being able to kind of leverage them, what we're seeing again is that like entry level folks, as long as they have kind of an open mind and are very creative thinking, have the power at their disposal to be able to iterate incredibly fast with agents even today. Yeah. Like we have, this is, for more of our full-timers here in New York, but like we had a new class join us, generally new grads, and it's day 3 and they're, building agents and building workflows, and they were not trained to do so. Yeah. So, very, very bullish in that, like, this is a world in which like all of us, have the tools already to be able to up level. And again, what does it do? It allows us to basically like grow 10 extra arms and, be able to like multitask in ways that we have never perceived to be possible before. So I think that's probably the thing I'm most excited about. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is super exciting, especially because I think, I look at some of the accessibility to like these tools that you talked about is so much lower, right, than a lot of things that we've seen kind of in our lifetime to get up to speed to and learn about. So it's amazing. I mean, that's a great example here about the new class is doing stuff on day 3, right, to be able to do that. So very interesting there to get your perspectives on that. Now, if we look at kind of like the future of Neo and maybe like the future of Traba as well. I mean, Neo is pretty new to the market, right? So tell us a little bit about like, how does this evolve? What does the future of Neo look like?
Yeah, so we're definitely really excited about the future here. So continue to expand our partnership. So working really closely with customers across the gamut on 3PL and logistics on a variety of new use cases. And so it's really about building out that library of capabilities that Neo is able to handle. So we're working on some cases of billing reconciliation, carrier mix optimization, carrier claims automation, and so like these are all use cases that will be super valuable for different customers. And so continue to build out, those capabilities and the platform itself. Where we see this going, over the medium term and then the long term, we really want to become that, that operating system that's driving better operational decision making for the customer, as well as automating a lot of this lower leverage work, right? And starting with the industrial customers that we're working with today, but in the future we can think about actually expanding across the supply chain as a whole, right? So if you think about upstream, the brands that a 3PL might be working with, you think downstream to the carriers and the shippers that might be actually getting it out to an end customer's doorstep. Right now, these businesses are completely siloed. Communications might be flying across the phone and email, and it's very much human mediated, of course. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for AI to transform that and to really for Neo to become really the connective layer across these different parties. And so I think that's kind of the direction that we want to continue building towards. And the way I see it, we'll have both Traba staffing as well as Neo in concert working together, delivering both, the operational firepower with staffing, as well as the intelligence layer through Neo that is helping your business reach that peak productivity that we're looking for.
All right, cool. Definitely. And looking forward to continuing to see kind of the evolution of Traba, and really exciting to be seeing kind of these AI agent workers, in a sense, come in and mix with the human workers in the warehouse operations. And really appreciate you both kind of breaking it down for us here and telling us what it's all about, and how warehouse operators can leverage it. So if people are interested in learning more about Traba or specifically Neo, what's the best way to get in touch? What's the best way to learn more?
Yeah, so our website obviously is great to go to. So that's traba.work, W-O-R-K. If you want to check out Neo, it's traba.work/Neo. And then obviously email us anytime if you're interested in chatting. My email is akshay@traba.work, so AKSHAY @traba.work, and then Jeff's is Jeff@traba.work. So yeah, very much looking forward to hearing from folks.
All right, awesome. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes here. So Akshay and Jeff, thank you for hosting me in your office today here in New York.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.